Quality Cares is excited to bring to you our new series, QC Quick Chat. I'm your host, R. Kerr, Vice President of Driver Services and Marketing. I'm so thrilled to bring to you conversations with QC leaders, professional drivers, and employees. So without further ado, our first guest today, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. So your name, your title, how long you've been in finance, which is kind of a clue to his title, and how long you've been with QC.
Yeah, so Chris Garrand, I'm the chief financial nerd for the company. The time I've been in trucking and the time I've been with the company are both the same. 7 years actually this week.
Oh, wow, congratulations.
So thank you very much.
Congratulations. So as a part of our series, we like to ask an icebreaker question. Okay. And so our icebreaker question is, if you were a truck driver, which lane would you choose and why?
Right. Well, given my personality, I have to have a lot of forecasted variables. So I would probably choose something that was very, very easy to forecast in advance, like maybe a dedicated lane. I'm a big fan of the whole open dispatch program because you can kind of pick your variables, right? So I'd have to, the uncertainty aspect of it would really drive me nuts. So I'd have to make it as certain as possible.
Okay, so using some personal skills and some personal preferences,
absolutely,
applying
because I know that one of the things that would just drive me nuts is not knowing what next week looks like. Yeah. And I know that's part of the business, but it would still drive me nuts.
Awesome. So the other thing we do with our QC Quick Chat is we like to poll our audience and see what questions you want to have answered by Chris. So we took a poll and the question came back, and it is, what is your opinion on the overall state of the trucking industry from a financial perspective?
Right. So the way, and Randy and I talk about this all the time, as you can imagine, he's much more optimistic about things in general. I'm much more pessimistic. It's just my job's nature. But I think that trucking is obviously in some significant challenges. There are some of the spot rates for dry van are at lowest points probably in the last 10 years, even lower than they were during COVID, which is very distressing. But I should say the less bad thing is that we are a tiny sliver of the overall trucking pie, if you will, liquid specialty chemical. We tend to be a lot less volatile than the rest of the trucking industry. There's actually a financial term called beta. Beta means volatility. So if the stock market moves this way, how much do you move in relation to the stock market? So you're already getting into the math. So our beta, if you will, our volatility matrix is actually very low compared to trucking, which is a good thing. Randy used to joke during trucking recession in the past where he would say, we suck less, basically, during bad times, right? But in good times, we don't get the lift that the dry van tends to get. So I would it's a long way of me saying that while trucking is going through some significant challenges, is going to continue to do so, we are not. We're going to be a lot more stable, a lot less volatile. And a lot of that has to do with because the barrier of entry in liquid chemical is much, much higher, right? You have to get hazmat, you have to get certain types of equipment, whereas to drive in, you just need a CDL and you can get a box van and you can go, right? So the higher the barrier of entry, the less competition you're going to have. And not to say that we don't have a lot of competition, we do, but it's going to be a lot less volatile. So I'm not too much worried about this point in time. Okay. Randy would be all smiles and stuff like that, but that's just why we differ. So.
Well, I guess that's why the saying is tanker drivers have the PhD of all truck drivers.
That's a very good way of looking at it, absolutely.
Yeah, there's that specialized skill set, and like you said, the additional endorsements and requirements. Yeah. So we're proud to say our drivers are at the top echelon.
They're at the doctorate level. You got it.
Absolutely.
We should call them doctor drivers.
We should, doctor drivers. Let's run that by HR.
Maybe that would be good.
So our next question for you, Chris, is we've talked about the acquisition by CSX. And so I'm intrigued, as I'm sure many of our audience members, how has your role or your team's role changed or developed since we were acquired by CSX?
Yeah, so my team's role, prior to CSX, I only had finance. Now I've got accounting, I've got risk, I've got accounts payable, tax, all sorts of other groups. So that my role has changed dramatically, and the accounting team's role has probably changed significantly. We used to close like 18 days. Now we close 2.5 days because it's part of a public company. It has to be closed at a certain point. And they've done a phenomenal job in making that happen. The finance team, pretty much the same, but my role from a direct involvement As you know, under the previous organization, that was handled by Joe Troy. But now that's all mine. And so there's been some learnings. I didn't have a lot of direct exposure to treasury or to the risk side of the equation. Mine was more operational in nature. So it's been a good learning. I was kind of thrown into the deep end pool, or drinking from the fire hose, pick your analogy. But it's been very entertaining. I was talking to a friend of mine who had been in consumer products, which is where I spent most of my prior to trucking. That's where I was in. And he asked me how I like trucking. And I responded to him that I would never go back to consumer products. Every day in trucking is far more exciting, more dynamic. It's very entrepreneurial in nature. I'm never going to want to go back to fighting over a couple of SharePoints on the grocery shelves. So.
Well, that's interesting because usually you think finance is very routine, very uniform, but it sounds like in trucking, we can throw that whole principle out the window.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that is routine, but there's a lot of stuff that, and I just got done telling you how I love to have the forecasted variables, but here I am contradicting myself because I do like some of the excitement that comes from okay, I didn't expect that kind of thing.
Like a good mix.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
So financially, how are we, QC, planning for 2023 and beyond? What are you focusing on?
Yeah, so I think some of the biggest risk is we weren't able to get a lot of our equipment like we usually do in past years, and so a big focus this year is replenishing and refreshing the tractor fleet, and that being a part of CSX it's a very big change from how we were in private equity, where we were highly levered, a lot of debt. With CSX, we're part of a very strong public company. And so we have access to capital channels that we didn't have or wouldn't have under private equity. So we're able to do that. We're able to get those tractors this year. That's a big part of the strategy. We are somewhat cautious, but cautiously optimistic at the same time about the rest of 23. I think we're going to have a very strong first half, but some slightly weaker second half. I'm a little worried about some of the things, but then again, if you ask Randy, he'd be here telling you it's all unicorns and rainbows. But it's my job to foresee risk as much as possible. So you're always, whenever you talk to somebody whose job it is to see risk, they're always going to be a little bit more pessimistic or cautious about the future. That's just the way. And if we're wrong, great. We're happy we're wrong. So
okay, good to know. And then, of course, what is your approach to driver compensation? How do you work with operations and reviewing the compensation, deciding what we need to do to make sure we're competitive?
That's a great question. So when we look at driver pay, what we want to make sure is if we're paying a driver to do something, as much as possible, we want to make sure the customer's paying us to do that thing as well. We focus a lot on what we call non-revenue activity, things that we're paying a driver for that we're not getting paid for a customer. We want to minimize that as much as possible. For the stuff we are getting paid for, that's the stuff that we want to make sure that we maximize the gain. So we know what we have to pay a driver. That's pretty easy to understand, unless there are unforeseen circumstances, there's a breakdown or they have to go out of route or something like that. We want to limit those unforecastable variables out of the way as much as possible and maximize revenue, minimize expense. Now, minimizing expense doesn't mean we don't want to pay the driver their fair share. We absolutely do. We realize it's a competitive market. We want to make sure they get paid what they deserve. They are the doctorates, right? So we want to make sure that happens. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we can take advantage of revenues so that when we look at that ratio, it converts to the bottom line in terms of profit. So we don't want to be like the government where we can run people and do it at a loss.
Right.
And do it, that's not what we're in business for.
And I think one of the things I was most impressed with our compensation is it's very market driven. You go to some companies, or I've worked at other transportation companies, and it was just this blanket approach. But we really do tailor it to the market. Yeah.
We do that on pricing, right? Because if freight running out of Chicago versus freight running out of Houston versus freight running out of the West Coast, it's all priced differently because of capacity constraints. Right. So you have to go, well, of course, we have the drivers in those areas, and we're going to have to pay them accordingly. So yeah, it's going to be different.
Yeah, it's better for the drivers.
Absolutely. You don't want a driver in California making one less than Florida because that one's paying a lot more income taxes. There's a lot of things as far as cost goes you have to consider.
I'm glad you're here to lead us through that. Sounds like you've got it hit on the head, right?
It's taken a little bit, but I think we've got a formula that works. Yes.
Awesome. So internally, Chris is known for having a saying that finance is fun.
Yes.
So much so, we actually thought it was a real podcast, and then we were disappointed to hear that it's not, but save room for the future, right?
Yeah.
So can you tell us why you really, sit on and you love that finance is fun? What does that mean to you?
Well, the reason I say finance is fun is because it really isn't. It's kind of like when you have you've seen parents with their little babies and they're trying to get them to eat vegetables, and what do? Here's the airplane coming, right? It's something like that where you're trying to take something which is normally a boring, at least most people see it as boring, unless you're like my team, insane, and you love it. They generally see it as boring, so you want to make it a little bit more exciting. And it is a very needed process, right? Because it gets to the point where we're profitable and everybody else, and we're all making money, we all get paid, right? So if you show people how boring equations and formulas and variables get to the point where they can better themselves and better their terminal or whatever the case may be, then they start to go, hey, this is actually not that bad. Yeah. And there are even areas of finance that I would never go to, like the accounting department. I think they're nuts with all the journal entries. You have to be a specific type of person to do that, although they do a phenomenal job at it. But that's my philosophy. So I try to make it an enjoyable process rather than just, hey, we're going to do financing and we're going to P&L call. And for the podcast thing, I make that joke all the time because I specifically have a call with every one of our terminals every month, and we talk about their numbers every single month. There aren't too many, chief financial nerds out there that do that on a regular basis and talk with their individual terminals. But that's a process that allows me to stay connected to them and allows them to get a little bit of a knowledge of how we look at ththings from a corporate perspective. So
finance is fun is really a little bit of reverse psychology.
It's a propaganda, yeah, a little bit. But at the end of the day, my people would tell me it's absolutely hilariously fun. But yeah, I think there are some folks out there that go, oh, here he comes again with the finance.
Finance is fun.
That's right. Finance is fun. So I put the smile on.
It's coined and it's used around the office. So whatever your intent was, I think it's working.
Awesome. Great.
Well, we thank you so much for joining us for our
pleasure.
QC Quick Chat. And we thank you, our audience, for joining us. If you have not had a chance to, please go back and watch our very first episode with our president, Randy Strutz, and look for more QC Quick Chats to come your way. Have a great day.